"Dad, the plan has changed. We've made our decision. You're not going to Alaska anymore. My husband wants to have private time with his own family." The dry, high-pitched vibration of my phone on the cold granite countertop at 6 o'clock in the morning was as sharp and sudden as a gunshot. It was a sound that shattered the quiet stillness of the early dawn, signaling the official beginning of a battle between a father and the daughter I had once loved more than life itself. I sat entirely motionless in the dark, silent kitchen, watching the gray winter fog of the Pacific Northwest stretch slowly across the wooden walls. Today was supposed to be the day we set sail. My luggage was already packed, and sitting near the doorway, my heavy coat was draped over the chair, and the boarding passes were printed and resting on the counter. But the brief, cold message that had just illuminated the screen of my phone froze everything in an instant. I read those words over and over again, my eyes tracing the clean digital font on the glass. Every single sentence sounded incredibly polite, yet it was as freezing and sharp as a carbon steel knife driven straight into my chest. There was not a single apology in that text. There was not a single satisfactory explanation, nor even a hint of hesitation. It was simply a cruel, dismissive command sent by my only daughter, Vivian, pushing me to the absolute margins of her life with effortless ease. My chest tightened, and a sharp, familiar pain shot down my spine. It was not the physical exhaustion of my 69 years of heavy labor. It was the sudden, catastrophic collapse of trust. It was the feeling of a master builder watching the grandest monument of his life, a structure he had poured his own blood, sweat, and youth to raise, suddenly crumble into worthless, dusty ruins. The daughter I had raised with my bare hands, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose tears I had wiped on 100 construction sites, now saw me as nothing more than a disposable nuisance. She had discarded me with the stroke of a thumb, treating my presence like a stain on her newly acquired high society life. Welcome back to Whispered Truths. Grab yourself a warm cup of coffee, a few snacks, get comfortable, and remember this: the people in these stories had every single opportunity to do the right thing. They simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 in the comments section so we can continue the story. And make sure to hit that subscribe button. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. I slowly looked around the empty, silent kitchen of the modest home I had lived in for 40 years. This house had once been filled with the warm laughter, the smell of fresh cedar wood, and the gentle presence of Clara, my late wife. The Alaska cruise was not supposed to be a simple, luxurious vacation. It was Clara's final sacred wish before she closed her eyes forever 3 years ago. During her final days in the hospital, as her breath grew shallow and her hand trembled in mine, Clara had whispered her dream to me. She wanted me to see the majestic blue-white glaciers of the Kenai Peninsula. She wanted me to finally rest, to escape the deafening noise of the structural steel and bridge construction sites, where I had spent 40 years of back-breaking labor to provide for our family. I had promised her, with tears streaming down my face, that I would make it happen. I promised her that I would carry her ashes to the wildest fjords of the north and set her free under the Arctic sky. Our daughter, Vivian, knew that perfectly well. She knew every single detail of her mother's dying wish. She knew how sacred, how incredibly precious this trip was to me. Yet she still chose to trample all over it, sacrificing her mother's memory and her father's dignity for the sake of her own social climbing. The silence inside the house was terrifying. It was like the suffocating, heavy stillness that hangs in the air of a demolition site just seconds before a massive skyscraper is brought crashing down. I did not cry. My tears had dried up long ago during those freezing winters spent welding structural steel high above the raging rivers. Instead, a freezing, calm current of pure determination began to flow through my veins. The initial shock and pain quickly dissolved, leaving behind a state of absolute, ice-cold clarity. I stood up slowly, my old knees popping in the quiet room. I placed the phone back down on the granite countertop, the soft, solid thud echoing through the stillness. I looked down at my hands. They were thick, heavy, and covered with raised white scars from decades of handling raw iron, heavy wrenches, and hot welding torches. These were the hands that had carried thousands of tons of brick and stone. These were the hands that had personally built the magnificent $3.2 million architectural concrete and glass estate on Mercer Island, where Vivian and her calculating husband, Casper, now lived. These were the hands that had signed the massive checks to buy them their luxury SUVs, to pay off their high-end credit card debts, and to fund their pretentious lifestyle. Now, in the eyes of Vivian and her snobbish husband, these scarred hands were nothing more than an embarrassment. I was a rough, ugly stain on the polished, artificial elegance of the Thorne family. They believed I was old. They believed I was senile, weak-minded, and easy to manipulate. They believed they had the absolute right to take away my final dream, steal my hard-earned money, and hand it over to wealthy strangers. That was the single greatest mistake of their lives. I walked over to the wide kitchen window and looked out at the front yard. The autumn wind was blowing hard, sending dry, yellow maple leaves scraping across the gravel driveway. My mind began to work with the cold, mathematical precision of a seasoned structural engineer. I knew that when a load-bearing column is completely rotted from within, you do not try to patch it with plaster. You do not try to negotiate with the decay. The only logical, safe solution is to level the entire structure to the ground and start over. Vivian and Casper wanted a war. They believed they were dealing with a frail, broken old man who would sit in the dark and weep. They were about to discover that they were dealing with the architect who had built the very ground they walked on. I would not use violence. I would not scream. I would use the very legal clauses, the financial resources, and the brick-and-mortar foundation I had built with my own hands to bury them under the weight of their own greed. They had spent months planting the explosives beneath their own lives. My only job was to stand back and press the detonator. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, my fingers brushing against the printed boarding pass and the small, heavy urn containing Clara's ashes. Clara had always told me that the northern fjords were where souls were truly free. This entire luxury voyage on the Glacier Sovereign had cost exactly $62,000. Every single dollar of that massive sum had come from my own sweat, my own retirement savings, and my own lifetime of work. Because my eyes had been failing me during the booking process, I had trusted Vivian with my credit cards and the online account. I believed my only daughter would honor her mother's memory. I believed she possessed a shred of human decency. But I had placed my trust in a wolf dressed in cashmere. A soft beep from my tablet on the corner of the table broke my thoughts. I walked over and tapped the screen. It was an automated confirmation email from the cruise line. The passenger ledger had been modified just 3 hours prior. My name, Franklin Ward, had been completely deleted from the suite reservation. In its place were 2 new, unfamiliar names, Lord Sterling Thorne and Lady Penelope Thorne. Casper's snobbish, aristocratic parents. Vivian had used my $62,000. She had used my late wife's dying wish to buy favor with her husband's wealthy, high society family. She wanted to prove to the Thornes that she was worthy of their prestigious lineage, and she had decided to pay for that social acceptance with her own father's heart. I looked down at the screen, the blue light reflecting off my face. The pain inside me was no longer a burning fire. It had hardened into something cold, dense, and absolutely unbreakable. Vivian's betrayal had officially ceased to bring me to tears. It was now sharpening my focus, acting as the perfect lubricant for the machinery of my retaliation. I walked over to the living room wall, where their elegant, silver-framed wedding portrait was hanging. Vivian's smile in the photograph now looked incredibly fake, a hollow painted mask. Casper stood beside her, his chest puffed out in his custom tuxedo, looking down at the camera with an insufferable air of unearned superiority. The massive cruise ship, the Glacier Sovereign, was scheduled to depart from the port of Seattle at exactly 11 o'clock this morning. Vivian and Casper believed they had quietly, cleanly removed me from the picture. They believed I would remain in this quiet house, drowning in my own loneliness, accepting my fate as a forgotten old man. What they did not know was that every single brick supporting their luxurious high society life had been laid by me. And once the master builder decides to reclaim the blueprint, the entire building comes crashing down. I sat down in my study, turning on my computer. My weathered fingers moved across the keyboard with absolute precision as I logged into the server of my former structural contracting firm. I needed to review every single financial and legal connection I had established with my daughter over the past 7 years. I wanted to see exactly how far the rot had spread. As I dug into the records, my eyes drifted back to a memory from just 1 month ago. We had been sitting in the grand, high-ceilinged dining room of their Mercer Island mansion, the very house I had spent 2 years personally constructing for them as a wedding gift. They were hosting an exclusive dinner party for Caspar's wealthy business partners and his parents, Lord Sterling and Lady Penelope. I had arrived straight from my workshop, wearing my ordinary clean flannel shirt and work pants. My hands, as always, were stained with oil and marked by the thick scars of my trade. Before the guests arrived, Casper had pulled me aside into the hallway. He looked at my rough clothes, looked at my scarred hands, and handed me a pair of expensive black leather gloves. "Franklin, please, do me a favor and wear these during dinner," Casper had whispered, his voice dripping with a patronizing high society condescension. "Lord Sterling's guests are very particular about aesthetics. Your scarred hands look a bit like a horror movie prop. and we wouldn't want to make the ladies uncomfortable while they are eating. Or, if you prefer, our housekeeper, Beatrix, can set up a beautiful table for you in the kitchen. It's much quieter there anyway. I had turned my head slowly, looking at my daughter Vivian, who was standing right beside him. She was wearing a gorgeous designer dress, her neck adorned with expensive pearls. I waited for her to speak. I waited for her to defend the father who had spent 40 years working in the freezing rain so she could attend the finest private universities. I waited for her to tell her husband that her father's scarred hands were the very reason they were standing in this multi-million-dollar mansion. But Vivian did not say a single word. She simply looked away, a faint, embarrassed smile on her lips, and nodded in agreement with her husband. Yes, Dad, Casper is right. It's just about the presentation. We just want everything to be perfect tonight. That memory returned to me now, cold and sharp. I finally understood the absolute truth. To Vivian and Caspar, I was not a father. I was not a beloved parent. I was nothing more than an old bricklayer whose usefulness had expired. A rough block of concrete that ruined the flawless artificial elegance of their high society world. I focused back on the computer screen, entering my administrative credentials. I opened the management software for our shared family trust and banking accounts. I wanted to see if they had made any other changes to our financial structure. But when the screen displayed the ledger for our primary $450,000 joint savings account, I suddenly froze. My breath caught in my throat, and the mouse felt incredibly heavy in my hand. A strange, highly official legal document was sitting in the pending approvals section. It was an application for a temporary asset freeze and a petition for a permanent adult guardianship. I clicked on the file, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. The document was a formal petition to have me, Franklin Ward, declared legally incompetent due to advanced, rapid-onset cognitive decline. The petitioner was my own daughter, Vivian Thorne. The document claimed that I was showing severe signs of diminished legal capacity, that I was no longer capable of managing my own finances, and that control of my entire $22 million estate and family trust fund should be permanently transferred to Vivian and her husband. A cold wave of physical disgust rose in my throat, so intense it made my head spin. The daughter I had carried in my arms, the little girl who used to burst into tears whenever I scraped a finger on a construction site, was now using the most monstrous, calculated scheme imaginable to have me declared insane. She wasn't just stealing my vacation, she was plotting to lock the remaining years of my life inside a legal cage, stripping me of my civil rights, my money, and my freedom. Also, she and Casper could seize my fortune to fund their high society vanity. I leaned back in my leather chair, the quiet room feeling colder than ever. I knew the art of demolition. It is never about swinging a sledgehammer blindly at the walls. A truly skilled contractor knows how to identify the building's exact critical load-bearing point. They know how to place a small, precise charge of explosives that will cause the entire structure to collapse inward under its own weight, leaving the surrounding buildings untouched. Vivian and Casper believed they were dealing with a frail, defenseless old man. They had absolutely no idea that I was the one who had mixed the mortar, poured the concrete, and calculated the loads for their entire existence. I shut down the bank ledger screen, my face a mask of absolute, frozen stillness. I slipped my phone out of my pocket. The screen vibrated with a sharp, digital location notification. It was from the automated maintenance tracking system for our family vehicles, a high-end service plan that I had personally kept active and paid for under my company's corporate account. This was a system I had installed on all our cars to ensure that Vivian was always driving a safe, well-tuned machine, particularly after the winter storms we frequently get here in the Pacific Northwest. According to the high-definition GPS tracker, Vivian's luxury SUV, the very car I had purchased for her as an anniversary gift just 2 years ago, was currently parked outside the Pinecrest Neurological Center, an elite, highly exclusive private medical clinic situated in the wealthy, forested hills on the outskirts of Seattle. My instincts, sharpened by 40 years of reading blueprints and detecting hidden structural defects, told me that this was where the final, ugly piece of their conspiracy was being prepared. This was where they were going to finalize the paperwork that would seal my fate, locking me into a cage I would never be able to escape. I picked up my car keys, stood up, and walked out into the cold, damp morning air. I needed to see this blueprint for their crime with my own eyes. I needed to witness the exact moment they signed the warrant for my destruction. I climbed into my heavy-duty truck, the diesel engine roaring to life with a deep, comforting vibration in the quiet driveway. I put the transmission into gear and drove out into the thick coastal fog that was rolling over the Puget Sound. The rain had started again, a steady, freezing drizzle that blurred the towering Seattle skyline into a hazy gray shadow. The windshield wipers swept back and forth at maximum speed, a rhythmic, mechanical clicking that matched the frantic beating of my heart. I kept my eyes fixed on the misty road, my mind working like a gears in a clock. The drive to the Pinecrest Neurological Center took 40 minutes of winding through the steep, heavily wooded lanes of the northern suburbs. The clinic was hidden behind a massive wrought iron gate and surrounded by ancient, towering pine trees. It looked more like a luxurious private resort for the wealthy elite than a medical facility. I parked my truck in a dark, secluded corner of the lower visitor lot, pulled the hood of my dark oilskin jacket low over my face, and stepped out into the freezing rain. I walked quietly through the side entrance of the VIP wing, my heavy work boots making absolutely no sound on the thick plush carpets. The hallway was quiet, smelling of expensive eucalyptus oil, fresh leather, and antiseptic polish. I moved past the empty administrative desks, my eyes scanning the polished brass directory plates until I reached the private rear consultation suites. Soft, familiar laughter suddenly drifted from the half-open door of the very last office at the end of the long hallway. I pressed my back flat against the cool concrete wall, sliding deep into the heavy shadows cast by a decorative marble column. Through the narrow 2-inch gap in the dark mahogany door, I could see the interior of the room clearly. Vivian was sitting on a plush leather sofa, her legs elegantly crossed, holding a delicate porcelain cup of chamomile tea. She looked incredibly relaxed, her face glowing with a sweet, vibrant excitement. Sitting directly across from her was Casper, who was swirling a glass of high-end scotch, and a middle-aged man wearing an immaculate white doctor's coat. A gold-plated name tag on his lapel read, Dr. Cassian Black, Chief of Neurological Assessment. Casper's calculating, arrogant voice cut through the quiet room, sending a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline straight to my heart. So, Dr. Black, you're absolutely certain that the diagnostic report will withstand a formal probate court audit? Caspar asked, his eyes narrowing as he took a sip of his drink. If there is even a single clerical error or a weak medical justification, my father-in-law's legal team will tear it to pieces. We cannot afford any mistakes. This has to be an open and shut case. My family's lawyers are top tier, but even they need a solid foundation to work with. Dr. Cassian Black let out a soft, dismissive chuckle, waving his hand with an air of absolute professional arrogance. My dear Casper, you are worrying about nothing. The diagnostic documents I have prepared are completely flawless. I have spent 20 years constructing these kinds of assessments for families of our caliber. I have already drafted a comprehensive history detailing Franklin's severe, rapid cognitive decline, extreme short-term memory loss, and paranoid delusions. One brief 15-minute evaluation under the guise of a routine checkup is all I need to sign the final medical certification. Once my signature is on that paper, no court in the state of Washington will question it. Inside the room, Vivian set her teacup down with a soft, delicate click, her face glowing with a sweet, maternal innocence that was absolutely terrifying. She adjusted her diamond pendant, her fingers moving with a practiced grace. And what about the final transaction, Dr. Black? Vivian asked, her voice as smooth and sweet as honey. I want to make sure there are no tracing issues that could link back to our personal accounts. Casper's father is extremely sensitive about public disclosure and audit trails, especially with the corporate restructuring coming up next month. Dr. Black smiled, leaning forward over his mahogany desk, resting his elbows on the polished leather pad. The $42.500 consultation and assessment fee has already been successfully received by our offshore clinic administration in the Caymans. It has been logged as a private consulting retainer for our international research division. As far as the public records are concerned, this was a routine specialized diagnostic review. The paperwork is ready. The moment your father-in-law is declared legally incompetent, you will have immediate, unconditional power of attorney over his entire $22 million trust and corporate assets. You will have full administrative access to his bank accounts, his investments, and his real estate. Casper smiled triumphantly, leaning back against the sofa, his eyes gleaming with a dark, predatory greed. Perfect. And what about the accommodation? We need him placed in a facility where he cannot cause any public disruptions. He is an old, stubborn bridge builder, and if he gets access to a phone or a lawyer, he could make things incredibly difficult for us. He has built half the commercial piers in this city, and he knows too many influential people. Do not worry, Dr. Black replied, his voice dropping into a low, professional whisper that carried a sinister chill. I have already secured a private long-term suite at our sister facility, the Cascade Crest Retreat, up in the northern mountains. It is a highly isolated, highly secure private estate. There are no public communication networks, the staff is extremely discreet, and visitors are strictly restricted. Once he is admitted under our emergency hold order, he will be completely cut off from the outside world. He won't have access to computers, mail, or phones. It will be the perfect peaceful place for him to spend his remaining years. He can ramble about his bridges to the pines, and nobody will ever hear him. Vivian let out a soft, shuddering laugh, her hand resting over her pearls. Thank God. He has been such an insufferable nuisance lately, always complaining about our lifestyle, always showing up at our house with his dirty boots and his grease-stained clothes, rambling about hard work and Clara's wishes. He actually believed he was going to take our mother's ashes to Alaska and scatter them over Glacier Bay. What a pathetic, sentimental waste of money. I am exhausted from pretending to be the devoted, grateful daughter. I have spent 3 years playing the part, and I want my reward now. Standing outside in the dark hallway, every single word they spoke struck my mind like a massive high-voltage bolt of electricity. My chest tightened, and the blood in my ears roared like a rushing river. The sheer, unfathomable cruelty of my only daughter was far beyond even my darkest, most cynical imagination. She wasn't just trying to steal my money. She was actively plotting to erase my entire legal existence from this world. She wanted to lock me inside the cold, concrete walls of an isolated mountain asylum, stripping me of my freedom and my mind, until I died alone in the dark, all so she could fund her high society vanity. My initial crushing pain suddenly transformed. It did not turn into shouting anger. It turned into something cold, dense, and absolutely unyielding as structural steel flowing through my veins. I did not cry. I did not storm into the room and scream at them. I kept my face frighteningly calm, my breathing slow and measured. The cold, mechanical instincts of a master bridge builder took over. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and gently pressed the recording app. I held the device near the 2-inch crack in the door. For the next 10 minutes, every single syllable of their conversation, from the $4,500 offshore bribe to the conspiracy to lock me away in the Cascade Crest retreat, was captured in perfect, high-definition audio. They believed they were dealing with a frail, broken old block of concrete that could easily be crushed and swept aside. They had absolutely no idea that they had just activated the most precise, most ruthless demolition machine imaginable. Vivian believed her father was an old man on the verge of collapse. She had no idea that she had just hand-delivered the exact blueprints of her own destruction. I gently stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, turned around, and walked out of the clinic. My footsteps on the marble tiles were steady, heavy, and absolutely deliberate. The blueprint for the purge was now complete in my mind. The next step was finding an ally with sharp enough claws to help me tear their world apart. I climbed back into my truck, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had not called in 15 years. As soon as the person on the other end answered, I spoke in a voice that was as flat and cold as a frozen lake. Gideon, I need you to prepare for the largest, most absolute demolition job we have ever executed. My truck came to a stop in front of a sleek, dark glass skyscraper in the very heart of downtown Seattle. The clock on my dashboard read exactly 8:15 a.m. I pushed open the heavy lobby doors, walked into the brass elevator bank, and took it straight to the top floor. Gideon Cross, the attorney known in the corporate world as the Leviathan of the probate court, was already waiting for me in his massive wood-paneled office. A single cup of hot, strong black coffee was sitting on his glass desk, steam rising slowly into the air. Gideon looked at my cold, emotionless face, saw the mud and rain on my boots, and raised an eyebrow in silent curiosity. He knew me well. He knew that I never showed up at his office unless a project had reached a critical threshold. I walked over, set my phone on the center of his glass desk, and pressed play. For the next 10 minutes, Vivian's sweet, poisonous voice and Casper's cold, calculating malice echoed through the silent room. Dr. Black's arrogant laughter sounded incredibly hollow under the tall, vaulted ceiling. Gideon listened to the entire recording without missing a single beat, his face remaining entirely expressionless. His eyes narrowed into 2 slits of dark, focused intelligence. He adjusted his glasses once, but his body remained completely still. When the recording finally ended with a soft beep, Gideon stopped the track, leaned back in his leather chair, and a cold, dangerous smile spread across his lips. A perfect textbook conspiracy to commit fraud, bribe a medical professional, and attempt civil rights deprivation, Gideon said, his voice quiet and sharp as a scalpel. I could have both of them and that doctor behind bars in a matter of 24 hours if you wanted, Franklin. The evidence on this phone is absolute, and Dr. Black has been under the state medical board scrutiny for offshore accounts for over 18 months. This will trigger an immediate federal investigation. I shook my head slowly, my eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, but my voice remained as flat and solid as a freshly poured concrete slab. No, Gideon, prison is too clean, too fast for them right now. I don't want them locked away before they've had the chance to fully enjoy their supposed victory. I want them to stand at the absolute peak of their artificial high society success, believing they have won everything, and then I want to pull the earth straight out from under their feet. I want them to experience what it feels like to lose their home, their money, and their dignity in a single, devastating afternoon, just as they planned to strip me of my life. I want the demolition to be absolute, leaving nothing but dust. Gideon's eyes lit up with a sudden dark appreciation. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers together on the desk. That is exactly the kind of structural demolition I would expect from a master bridge contractor. You want to cause a total structural failure. So, where do you want to place the first charge? We start with the load-bearing pillars of their entire existence, I replied, my voice a quiet, freezing rumble that echoed off the mahogany walls. The $3.2 million Mercer Island mansion they live in, the $450,000 joint bank account they are trying to steal, and the prestigious high society reputation they have spent their lives building on my back. I built it all, Gideon, and I am going to be the one to tear it down. Gideon reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound legal file, sliding a series of documents across the glass table toward me. The charter and supplemental provisions of the Ward Family Trust, which I drafted for you when you retired, are still legally binding, Franklin, Gideon explained, his fountain pen hovering in the air. The Mercer Island mansion and the trust funds were signed over to Vivian with very specific, highly conditional clauses. If the beneficiary commits any act that causes physical, financial, or severe legal harm to the creator of the trust, you have the unconditional, unilateral right to revoke the trust and reclaim every single asset within 24 hours, without requiring their consent or a court order. On top of that, I have a close friend, Saskia Blake, a notorious, extremely wealthy private equity and distressed property investor. She has been looking to buy an estate on Mercer Island for months, and she is ready to wire the cash immediately in exchange for the deed. She won't ask any questions, and she will execute the eviction immediately. I picked up the black fountain pen, my scarred fingers tightening around the metal. Without the slightest hesitation, I signed the series of documents, granting Gideon Cross full, immediate authority. Every stroke of the pen felt like the heavy, rhythmic blow of a pile driver, forcing the final, unyielding nails into the financial coffin of my ungrateful children. They believed they were fighting a helpless, senile old man. They had absolutely no idea that they were fighting the architect who had designed every single pillar of their world. Gideon gathered the signed documents, checked his luxury watch, and looked up at me. It is exactly 9 o'clock, Franklin. The Glacier Sovereign sets sail in exactly 2 hours. I suggest you head to the harbor. You have earned the right to watch the first charge detonate. I walked out of the dark glass tower, leaving the warmth of the lobby behind as I stepped back into the freezing Seattle drizzle. My next destination was the port of Seattle, where the massive 6-star luxury cruise ship, the Glacier Sovereign, was currently docked. I wanted to see the triumphant, arrogant smiles on Vivian and Caspar's faces before the demolition order was officially executed. I blended into the massive crowd of travelers at the harbor, my dark oilskin jacket and low hood keeping me entirely invisible among the excited tourists and families who were boarding for their dream vacations. The 11 o'clock autumn sun was weak, barely cutting through the dense, gray fog that hung over the water, but the towering white hull of the Glacier Sovereign looked like a massive floating fortress against the dark, churning ocean. I stood silently behind a massive concrete pylon near the VIP boarding ramp, my eyes fixed on the exclusive VIP stateroom deck of the ship. This was the deck reserved for those who spent tens of thousands of dollars to look down on the rest of the world. And there she was. Vivian was standing on the private balcony of her luxury suite, wearing an elegant cream-colored cashmere and silk yachting suit. Beside her stood Caspar, his chest puffed out, laughing as he uncorked a bottle of vintage champagne. Foam sprayed into the cold air as they raised their crystal glasses in a toast, celebrating their upcoming luxury voyage to Alaska. Standing right beside them were Lord Sterling and Lady Penelope Thorne, wrapped in heavy, expensive wool coats, looking incredibly pleased with themselves, whispering and pointing at the scenic harbor. They were drinking my champagne. They were spending the $62 I had earned through 40 years of backbreaking labor. They were trampling on Clara's final, sacred wish so they could play act their artificial high society fantasies. Vivian leaned over, whispering something into Lady Penelope's ear, her face glowing with a triumphant, arrogant pride. She believed she had won. She believed she had successfully pushed her old, useless father into the dark, leaving him to wither away while she claimed his fortune. She had absolutely no idea that the father she had discarded was standing directly below her on the concrete pier, silently watching her every move. I looked at my only daughter, and the very last trace of parental pity inside my chest vanished, replaced by an absolute, freezing resolve. The ship's horn suddenly blasted, a deep, deafening rumble that shook the concrete under my feet and echoed across the harbor, signaling the vessel's departure. The massive vessel began to move slowly, pulling away from the dock as thick, gray exhaust billowed from its towering funnels. The gap between the ship's hull and the concrete pier widened, cold water churning into white foam. As I watched the Glacier Sovereign drift farther and farther into the open, cold waters of the Puget Sound, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my contacts, found Gideon Cross's name, and sent a single one-word message: detonate. The demolition had officially begun. While the luxury ship carried the Thorne family out into the vast, silent ocean, a carefully programmed financial storm of my own making was about to sweep across the mainland, severing every single line of power, ownership, and credit they possessed. The utilities, the bank accounts, the deeds, and the security systems would all be stripped away without a single ounce of mercy, leaving them utterly stranded in the middle of the sea. The Glacier Sovereign glided smoothly across the dark, swelling waves of the Pacific Northwest, heading north toward the freezing wilderness of Alaska. On board, Vivian and Casper were still completely intoxicated by their sense of victory, entirely unaware that the ship's maritime communications network was about to connect them to a brutal, unyielding reality. At exactly 12 o'clock noon, I was sitting in the temporary downtown office of the real estate investor, Saskia-Blake. The transaction had been processed with the rapid, silent efficiency of a computer-controlled demolition charge. Over the next 5 hours, Gideon Cross and I carried out the 3 phases of the purge with absolute mathematical precision. The first step was the immediate reclamation of the Mercer Island mansion. Gideon sent an emergency, certified legal notice to the private residential association of the Mercer Island community. The original trust deed contained a critical, conditional clawback clause. If the beneficiary engaged in any conspiracy to cause legal, physical, or severe financial harm to the trust's creator, ownership of the property would instantly revert to the creator. The forensic recording of the $42,500 bribe at Dr. Black's clinic was absolute, irrefutable evidence. Within 45 minutes of the email being sent, the deed was officially, legally transferred back into my name. The second step was cutting off their financial oxygen. I logged into our joint bank account, where the $450,000 we had accumulated over the years was sitting. This was the cash Vivian and Casper intended to use to fund their lifestyle while they locked me inside the mountain asylum. With a single tap of my finger, I initiated a wire transfer, moving every single dollar into my private corporate operating account. The balance on the screen dropped to a perfect, mocking zero. The third step was the leveling of what remained. I turned to Saskia-Blake, who smiled coldly as she opened her leather briefcase. I signed the purchase agreement, selling the Mercer Island mansion to her private equity firm for less than its market value. The transaction was logged instantly into the county database, but I had placed one non-negotiable condition on the sale. Saskia had full, immediate authority to send in her private moving crews to clear out the house and seal the property. They had exactly 48 hours to clear out every single one of Vivian and Casper's personal belongings before they returned from their cruise. Nothing was to be left behind. I stood up and shook Saskia's hand, my rough, scarred fingers tightening around hers. The machinery was in motion. Far out on the cold, open ocean, Vivian was walking through the glittering, high-end designer shopping arcade on the luxury deck of the Glacier Sovereign. She spotted a limited edition, emerald-encrusted crocodile leather handbag in the window of a boutique, priced at exactly $11,500. Smiling with a deep, arrogant confidence, she walked inside and handed her black VIP credit card to the cashier. She had absolutely no idea that the moment the card was swiped through the terminal, a long, harsh error tone would echo through the quiet boutique, drawing suspicious, mocking looks from the other wealthy passengers nearby. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your transaction has been declined," the sales associate said, her voice dripping with a polite, professional embarrassment. Vivian's arrogant smile instantly froze, her face flushing a deep, angry red. She snatched the card back, her voice rising in irritation. "Excuse me, run it again. This is an unlimited black VIP card. I have hundreds of thousands of dollars in my primary account. There is absolutely no way it can be declined." The sales associate swiped the card a second time. The reader emitted the exact same harsh rejection tone. Vivian's heart skipped a beat. A cold feeling of panic began to settle in her stomach. She quickly pulled out her phone, logging into her mobile banking application through the ship's high-speed satellite Wi-Fi. It took several agonizing seconds for the screen to load, but when the balance page finally appeared, Vivian felt the blood completely drain from her face. Every single dollar of the $450,000 in our joint savings account had been completely withdrawn through online banking before the ship had even cleared the Seattle harbor. And beneath the zero balance, a bright red flashing legal alert was displayed. Assets frozen under emergency court order due to suspected probate fraud and criminal conspiracy. Vivian stood entirely frozen in the center of the boutique, her hands trembling so violently that the black credit card slipped from her fingers and fell to the carpet. At that exact moment, Casper came rushing into the arcade, his face ghostly pale and beads of cold sweat rolling down his forehead. He grabbed Vivian's arm, pulling her into a quiet corner, his voice trembling with a frantic, desperate terror. "Vivian, my cards, they've all been locked," Casper whispered, his voice cracking. "Even my father's corporate account. The ship's purser just approached me in the lounge. They said our credit card authorization for the $48,000 VIP suite charges was rejected. The casino cashier just confiscated my chips. What the hell is going on?" Before Vivian could find her voice, two of the ship's security officers in crisp white uniforms approached them, their faces polite but completely unyielding. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, due to the immediate suspension of your registered payment methods and the legal alert flagged on your accounts, we are required to revoke your access to the VIP lounges, the specialty restaurants, and all premium onboard services," the security officer said, his voice flat and professional. "You are required to vacate your suite immediately. Our crew has already moved your luggage to the standard lower-tier passenger cabins on Deck 2. Please follow us." The humiliation was a crushing physical blow. Only hours earlier, Vivian and Casper had been standing on the top deck sipping champagne and looking down on the world as first-class elites. Now they were escorted down the narrow, industrial service stairwells to the lowest deck of the ship, placed in a tiny, windowless interior cabin smelling of heavy fuel oil. During the next 3 days of the cruise, they were forced to stand in a long, crowded line with hundreds of ordinary passengers, holding cheap plastic trays to receive standard buffet meals. Lady Penelope Thorne, Casper's snobbish mother, looked at the ordinary food before turning her cold, venomous glare directly onto Vivian. "You told us your family owned a multi-million-dollar estate, Vivian," Lady Penelope hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You told us your father was a senile, stupid old man who was easily controlled. So why are we being treated like common beggars in front of the entire ship? Your family is nothing but a bunch of cheap, fraudulent con artists." Vivian could not answer. She sat in the crowded dining hall, tears of absolute humiliation streaming down her face, clutching a phone that had absolutely no service in the middle of the cold northern sea. 3 days later, the Glacier Sovereign finally docked back at the port of Seattle. The nightmare was only beginning. The moment Vivian's phone regained cellular service, she did not even wait to collect her luggage. She and Casper hailed a taxi, rushing straight to the $3.2 million Mercer Island mansion, desperate to escape the suffocating humiliation of the cruise ship and salvage whatever remained of their dignity. The taxi stopped outside the massive front gate. Vivian stepped out of the car, took one look at the house, and froze. The entire smart lock system, with its polished brass hardware that she had chosen so carefully, had been completely ripped out. In its place were heavy-duty, industrial-grade mechanical padlocks, the kind used to secure commercial construction sites. Standing outside the gate were two massive, muscular men wearing the uniforms of a private security company blocking the driveway. "What is the meaning of this?" Vivian shrieked, running toward the gate. "This is my house. Move out of my way." A car door clicked open behind them and Saskia Blake stepped out, a thick stack of legal documents and the signed deed in her hand. "I suggest you remain calm, Mrs. Thorne," Saskia said, her voice as smooth and cold as polished ice. "This property now belongs to my investment firm. Your father sold it to me 3 days ago. The transaction is fully registered with the county." Vivian looked as though she had been struck by a physical bolt of lightning. "Sold? That's impossible. This is my home. That old man has advanced Alzheimer's. He has no legal right to sell anything. He belongs in an institution." Saskia shrugged, a look of complete aristocratic boredom on her face. "If you have an issue with the sale, I suggest you take it up with your belongings. We cleared out the entire house yesterday under the terms of our contract." Saskia pointed across the street. Vivian turned around, and her entire world of luxury lay exposed in the cold, gray morning light. Her designer clothes, her expensive shoes, her luxury handbags, and Casper's custom suits had been dumped into a massive, dirty heap on the muddy grass of the public sidewalk, and hanging directly over the pile was a large piece of cardboard with thick red lettering written across it. Free stuff. Take whatever you want. A small crowd of local pedestrians and neighbors had already gathered around the massive pile, happily picking through the expensive items Vivian had once treasured more than life itself. A middle-aged woman was holding up the designer silk gown Vivian had worn at her wedding reception, checking the seams with a delighted smile. A young child was stepping on Casper's luxury watch boxes without a second thought. Vivian's pride completely collapsed. With a wild, desperate scream, she threw herself into the middle of the crowd, clawing and scratching at the people to snatch her belongings back. Let go of that, those are mine. You dirty beggars, get away from my things. Let go, she shrieked, her face twisted with a mixture of absolute rage and suffocating humiliation. Caspar stood on the sidewalk, watching the chaos with a look of complete, hollow shock. He looked at Saskia Blake's legal documents, looked at the heavy locks on the gate, and realized the war was already over. He made absolutely no effort to help his wife. Just then, Lord Sterling and Lady Penelope's luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. Lady Penelope lowered the window, looking at the screaming, mud-covered Vivian with an expression of absolute disgust. What a pathetic family of cheap, fraudulent con artists, Lady Penelope spat, her voice cold and sharp. Casper, get your things, get into this car, and let's go home. You will file for divorce immediately. A common, low-class girl like this does not deserve to set foot in our household again. Casper did not hesitate. He ignored his wife's screams, turned his back on her, and scrambled into the back seat of his parents' car. The luxury vehicle immediately sped away, leaving Vivian standing entirely alone on the muddy street corner. Her husband had abandoned her, her in-laws despised her, and her fortune was completely gone. She collapsed onto her knees beside the heap of ruined, dirty clothes, sobbing uncontrollably. Then, through her choking sobs, the phone inside her jacket pocket began to ring. The screen displayed a single word, Dad. Vivian's trembling, dirt-covered fingers swiped the screen, holding the phone to her ear as she wept into the receiver. Dad, Dad, please, save me, Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking with a desperate, hysterical panic. Casper left me, the Thorns abandoned me. I've lost everything, Dad, I know I was wrong. Please, please, take me home. I was standing in the wide, sunlit waiting area of the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, looking out through the massive glass windows at the twin-engine plane preparing to take off for Anchorage. I pulled the small, heavy urn containing Clara's ashes a little closer to my chest, my rough, scarred fingers tracing the cold metal. I don't have Alzheimer's, Vivian, I said, my voice as flat, calm, and unyielding as the concrete bridges I had spent 40 years building. But I have finally completely awakened. Vivian's sobbing caught in her throat, a terrifying silence falling over the line as she realized the old father she had looked down on had personally designed the collapse of her entire world. I built you a good, honest home, Vivian, I continued, my voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of hard work, but you chose to destroy its foundation. You and Casper paid a $42,500 bribe to a doctor to have me declared insane so you could steal my money and lock me away in an asylum. I sent the entire high-definition recording and every single record of that transaction to the FBI 2 hours ago. They are on their way to find you and Dr. Cassian Black right now. You can answer for your actions in a federal court. Dad, please, don't do this to me. I'm your only daughter. Vivian screamed in absolute despair. You gave up the right to be my daughter the very second you erased my name from your mother's trip, I replied, my voice steady and quiet. Live the rest of your life among the ruins you created with your own hands. I ended the call, removed the SIM card from my phone, and dropped it into the trash bin beside my seat. Then I picked up my bag, walked toward the departure gate, and felt lighter than I had in decades. This story is an expensive, hard-earned lesson about family, respect, and filial devotion. The limitless, unconditional forgiveness of parents can sometimes create ungrateful children. They begin to treat love as an entitlement, and they begin to believe their parents' property and lives belong to them by right. Be kind to your children, but never allow your kindness to become a tool for others to exploit. Once the foundation of morality begins to rot, all the wealth and prestige in the world become nothing more than a castle built on sand, ready to collapse at any moment. Looking back on this journey, I realized 3 profound lessons about life that I want to share with you. Lesson 1. Don't confuse compliance with respect. Some families don't argue not because they are happy, but because one person has chosen to remain silent, swallowing their pain to keep the peace. But patient silence never changes a toxic person. It only gives them more opportunities to escalate their abuse. Lesson 2. The source of pain explains behavior, but it does not excuse responsibility. Vivian had been manipulated by her husband and her own greed, which explains her anger, but it does not excuse her trying to steal my late wife's ashes and lock me in an asylum. She was only truly faced with the consequences when she had to stand among the ruins of her own making. Lesson 3. Forgiving someone and allowing them back into your life are two completely different things. I can let go of my resentment toward Vivian, but she will never be allowed back into my life. Forgiveness is about freeing your own soul. Boundaries are about protecting yourself from being hurt a second time. If this story touched your heart, or reminded you of someone who protected you when you were at your weakest, feel free to share it with them. And if you enjoy stories where the truth and self-respect always find their way home, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've watched this far, along with the name of your hometown. Thank you for joining Whispered Truths. I will see you in our next story.